just happy to be here and say hello. I'm Councilor Essaibi George. Like I said, I'm an at-large city councilor, so I get to work with your district councilor every single day on the council. Most of you know the face of our office is Karen Foley, who's here. And I think Michael, I hope Michael's already introduced Michael, who's fabulous from Lydia's office. And I always say that our staffs in our respective offices are the ones that really do the work. Our name gets to go on everything, but I don't do anything unless Karen asks me to do it. So make sure that you build a relationship with her. I think at some point she'll give out our newsletter for the end of the term 2 report. So I just kicked off our third term, our year 5 and 6 in office. I'm very happy of the work that we've been able to do over the last 2 terms, and excited to continue it into this third term. We talk a lot about sort of re-election, and there's sometimes this natural break in service, but I know I speak for myself and for Lydia Edwards' office, there really is no sort of stoppage of work. The work continues. Maybe take a day or 2 off over the holidays. But we're right back in it, and it's a sort of seamless transition from one term to the next. So happy to continue this work. You may recall I'm a former high school teacher in Boston. I taught for 13 years at East Boston High before I was elected to the city council. So a lot of my work on the council, a lot of our offices work, in addition to sort of the daily constituent services and responding to our calls and residents' calls from across the city. My work is focused pretty specifically on education. I'm a BPS parent, I'm a BPS graduate, so our schools and what's happening in our schools is really important to me. And we're right now preparing and getting ready for the city's budget process. We have about we'll have a $3.5 billion budget put before us when the administration presents it to us in April. About a third of that, or $1.4 billion, is dedicated to our schools. And for me as a BPS parent, a graduate, former teacher, it's really important that in our schools and across our district, we're doing right with that money. It's your taxpayers' money. It's our investment in what's happening in our schools. And part of my work is to make sure that we're spending it the way that we should be. We have a $126 million budget for school transportation, so getting our kids to and from school. We overrun that by millions of dollars every single year. So again this year, as I have for the last few years, I've called for a mid-year or mid-school year report on spending so that we can do better with predicting how much our school transportation is costing us. And how do we restrain some of that spending, because those are dollars that could be very directly allocated to our schools. Through last year's budget cycle, I was able to advocate and get full-time nurses in all of our schools. We have 125 schools in the district. About 44 of them did not have a full-time nurse. And most kids get belly aches and bumps and bruises over the course of a day. The nurse is helpful for those things, but why we really need full-time nurses in our schools is we have kids that are dealing with trauma, that are dealing with significant poverty, that have hunger issues, and Katie talked a little bit about food insecurity with families across the city really making some significant choices between food and other things, whether it be rent or other costs of living here in the city of Boston. We have 5,000 students in the Boston Public Schools, almost 10% of our student population that's experiencing homelessness. The former chair of the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health and Recovery, and in this new term, that work has been, our committee structures have been changed a little bit, but that work for me continues because supporting our kids in our schools is so critically important, especially those experiencing homelessness. We think about the impact on that child, but really the greater impact on that family and on that classroom. So when a child goes to the nurse for a bump and a bruise, that's fine. But a lot of our kids are going to the nurse's office because they're presenting with some other issues, some other trauma. And we need full-time nurses in our schools to be that gatekeeper, to make sure that kids are getting access to the resources they need. So we were able to have a hearing early last year and advocate pretty strongly with the mayor to make sure that we had this full-time nurse in all of our school buildings. I was really excited with the mayor's commitment to that effort, and we only have, I think the number last week was 5 schools that do not yet have a full-time nurse. They have part-time nurses. We're in the middle of hiring nurses for those remaining schools. So we've accomplished quite a great deal of work at that space. The other piece that I think is missing from our schools, and we talk a lot in my experience when I was teaching, is it's so hard to focus on a rigorous academic curriculum when you have kids who are distracted with some of these other issues. So making sure that our schools have the support services, mental health therapists, social workers in school buildings, so teachers can really spend the time they need to teach. And when I think about the transportation budget, I think about the millions and millions of dollars that I think is wasted that could be invested into additional support services in our school buildings for student-facing supports. So whether it's that mental health professional or a social worker, whether it's a librarian, whether it's a computer science teacher, whether it's an additional arts teacher or an arts teacher, not always an additional one, whether it's to strengthen athletic programming, all of those pieces are really important to me. And it also makes that additional funding can help improve inclusion classrooms so that we're teaching our students who have special needs alongside kids who are coded regular ed, and how do we do a better job supporting those kids in the classroom every single day. So I also mentioned I used to chair the Committee on Homelessness, Mental Health and Recovery, and I think I've talked to you over the past year about some of our work around the opioid crisis and making sure that individuals who are homeless, who are dealing with an addiction, who are facing a mental health crisis in our neighborhoods is able to access some of the supports that they need. That we're doing a better job in our shelters, and that we're also, and Katie talked a little bit about advocating and lobbying at the state level, that we're working with our legislative partners from outside the city of Boston to do more. When we think about our shelters, for example, 65% of individuals who are in our shelter system, and this isn't our families, this is individuals, so our city-run men's shelter and our city-run women's shelter, 65% of those residents, those guests, are not from the city of Boston. And part of that is because we are, many services are centrally located in the city of Boston and across our neighborhoods, including the North End, and not available in outside communities. So we continue, and I continue to advocate for additional resources in other communities, because if you are experiencing a hardship, you should be close to your social network, you should be close to your community network. And increasing those services in other cities and towns is one way to do that. We also know when it comes to the opioid crisis, 75% of individuals who have an overdose are overdosing in their home. So resources need to be close to home. And for me, that's about making sure that services are distributed widely and broadly, because we know that this is a crisis that touches everybody. So I'm gonna stop there, and I've given you a lot. I will say that although my work is focused on those two sort of general areas, as an at-large counselor, as a politician, I'm a busybody and I like to poke my nose into lots of different things. So happy to answer questions about everything and anything, and questions that I don't have answers to. Karen will make sure to take good notes, and we'll get some responses. So the floor is yours.
Good question. We focused a lot on education. Are they doing more programs to try to focus on keeping the dropouts? I know some places are trying to push to have the dropout finish school at 18, but a lot of the schools, there's still a lot of, they turn 16 and they drop out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in education, you want kids to stay in school and finish their education and finish it successfully. We are always working on that dropout rate and lowering that dropout rate for a few reasons. One, it's good for a kid. We know a child that receives a high school diploma and hopefully additional degrees after that, but when they receive that high school diploma, they have a higher likelihood of earning more money and living a more stable life, as opposed to dropping out and hopefully maybe getting a GED or a high school equivalency. But we're also measured at the state based on that. So of our 125 schools, we want, as a city, to maintain control over those schools. And the state is about to come out with a report that's identified about 30 schools in the district that are low performing and well underperforming. And we don't want to lose control of those schools. So dropout rate is one of those measurements that we work on every single day, as well as attendance. So it's not dropping out of school, but it's also being present in school every day. We have, I think, as a city district-wide, we have about an 80 to 85% attendance rate, and we're constantly pushing to make sure that we have a 90% attendance rate in our schools, and that's one of those measurement pieces.
Part of the reason I brought that up is I used to volunteer Partners in Education, and one time I went there and there was a class of like 30 students sitting in the classroom, and the teacher came up to me and said, "These are already gone. They don't," it's like she said that they get to a point where the teachers are the ones that sort of consider them by the time they're in junior, middle school, that if you don't get them then, afterwards, if your program is only focusing when they're already in high school, you're missing the boat.
Yeah, there has to be a much, and we have to start focusing on kids when they're in pre-kindergarten, really before they're in school, because all of the pieces that we do in 0 to 5, what we do with children 0 to 5 years old, from birth to 5, before they enter formal education, really can really indicate or predict that child's future. So it's not even in middle school or elementary school, it's well before that, but strong programs at every grade level, but in particular we see 4th and 5th grade as the key indicator of a child's future success, what happens in those grades. And that's where if we have failed to identify a learning disability, or we have failed to challenge that child in a classroom, or we have disciplined that child in a way that's not appropriate, that's how we lose kids. It's really not about their academic ability, because kids have the ability to thrive in school, but we've missed, the adults and the people delivering education and making decisions about our educational system have missed the boat. So it's really about 0 to 5 years old, and that's why you see the administration and the mayor's office really looking at pre-K programs, because the earlier we can get our kids into the system, the better, or into an educational system, the better, but not ever losing sight until high school. Because you're right, and I think what the teacher was probably alluding to is the damage is done by the time they get to us in high school. That's not to say, though, that we shouldn't be continuing to work to save every child at every moment along the way. Yeah. Appreciate the question and the commentary. Hello.
Hi. You had discussed some of the nursing program with full-time nurses. I was involved in a program with the Shaw Foundation trying to bring healthy food to schools, which you've heard of it. But through that program, we saw the hunger that was in schools, and remember the image of a kid pulling an apple out of the trash can to bring home for the weekend on Friday. Are the nurses seeing or dealing with hunger issues as well, aside from the bumps and bruises you've seen?
I think that's probably the majority of what they're dealing with.
Is hunger.
And we children in the public school system, and I think this is sort of a general number, but it would apply to Boston for sure, is about, kids get about 40% of their daily calories, 60% of their daily calories at school. So we need to make sure, and the Shaw Foundation was the My Way Cafe, making sure that kids have access to fresh foods and healthy foods, but also to foods, to calories. And I always think about some of the conflict and the challenges around the chocolate milk versus the white milk debate. I'd rather my kid drinking milk. So whatever it is, give it to them. If it's got a little extra sugar, that's okay. But it's also, in My Way Cafe has been working to do some of this, is if kids, we have very little time for lunch in our schools. So some of the things I advocate for is extended lunch period, extended or an opportunity for recess and sort of free time, free play. I have 4 boys, so as much time as they can get to sort of be boys is good, because then we want them to be productive in a classroom, in an academic setting. Is it making sure that they have enough time for lunch, but they're not waiting in line for lunch, because my kids, if the line's too long, they won't eat lunch. And my kids have an abundance of food at home. When we think about the child who is dealing with food insecurity, we need to make sure we get them as much as we can. A lot of our schools now, especially because of the rise in homelessness with our student population, have relationships with food pantries, so food bags are going home with kids on Fridays for that weekend issue, and for school breaks and for summer. So now we've got in our summer months across the city, at City Hall Plaza, at libraries, at youth centers, community centers. If you are 18 or younger, we've meal programs, and we give out thousands and thousands of meals over the summer, so young people have access to food. Because we recognize it as a huge issue. Through my work with the family shelter, so I brought together a group of family shelter providers from across the area, because Boston Families are housing shelter both in the city and outside of the city. And one of the things that we learned through that work is when a family does get housing, that they don't come with food, but the grocery shopping that needs to happen. So we've been working with the Greater Boston Food Bank around designing a to-go kit, so families, when they do get housing, so they have that starter pack of food. What we'd really like to do is the Department of Transitional Assistance, where a family would present themselves if they were homeless, is to also give them some sort of to-go box of some staples and non-perishable foods, not necessarily high quality, unfortunately, because we want them to be able to last a little bit. But, you know, if a family is dealing with housing insecurity, they are also dealing with food insecurity. And Katie shared a lot about that in her presentation.
Councilor, can you comment, please, on the reform efforts for the Zoning Board of Appeal in terms of representation of tenants and residents, as well as the ethics in terms of potential conflicts of interest, and finally, the issue of making the process, a due process fair, that is for people to be able, in a dignified way, when they have their grievances to present, to be able to do it in such a way, even in a room that it disrespects people who have hearing problems, but even just the entire atmosphere. And what efforts is the council making, the reform of that genuinely to make it fair and accessible?
Yeah, so your city councilor, Lydia Edwards, is,
Yes.
did she refile that yet this year?
I believe the hearing date's the 20th.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
so so at the end of last year, and then Councilor Edwards has already
But
refiled.
I meant the council in general, does it have much support?
So I think there is quite a bit of support. The hearing has been scheduled, so we'll have an opportunity to really look at that proposal. I think that there's general consensus, I don't want to speak for my colleagues because we haven't voted on it or talked in public about it, but there's general consensus around having better representation on that zoning board that is more reflective of what we think someone making decisions about what's happening next door or across the street to you is. So I'd say there's some general agreement to it, but without that hearing, we don't, because of open meeting law, we don't sort of huddle around a table and talk about these things, but the hearing maybe has been set, and we can confirm that hearing date that the council will have on Lydia's proposal. We can email it and get that out, so people who want to participate can.
To confirm it, it is February 25th at 4 p.m. at the INL Chamber at City Hall.
But I hear you with the commentary about the board makeup and the representation that's on the board, but also the experience for the resident who comes either as a proponent or an opponent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's something that we hear both at the ZBA and at the BPDA. We've been doing some work in our office specific to the BPDA around noticing residents and abutters and communities and what that process, formalizing that process in a way that's more predictable for neighbors.
Because many people, I'll leave it at that, they take valuable time out from work and
Yeah.
other family responsibilities. They go, and when it's more or less known perhaps beforehand that there's going to be a continuance of postponement, and it is absolutely destructive of a respect for the administrative processes in the city when people make the effort to do that and they see that their time is wasted.
Right, I know we're always looking for better engagement from the communities. We don't, as an elected official, I don't want the attitude of any resident to be like, well, it's already decided, it's a waste of my time, who cares? Which I know is a sentiment that a lot of our residents feel. Karen spends the entire day up at the ZBA.
So I was just gonna say, the Salem Street that Carol Fabiano is, so that's been deferred 4 or 5 times. And they're getting big groups of people to come in, Carol is, and then they all have to go home, and, we talk about it, they're taking off work, getting babysitters, everything, so we'll talk about that.
Thanks for the
That's
question.
the meeting.
Any other questions for me?
We hear that the Elliott School is a great school,
Mhm.
and it really bothers me that any kid would have to go to a school that's not a great school. So have you looked at what makes for greatness in certain schools that other schools lack? And what do you do to make every school great?
So that's something that we wrestle with every single day. We have a significant investment. The mayor just announced in his State of the City address, $100 million investment over the next 3 years that's really focused on this group of 30 or so schools that, as a parent, I likely wouldn't feel comfortable sending my child to. And that's an embarrassing public statement as an elected official to know that we have schools in our district, in our city, that aren't good enough for my kids. And they should all reflect the Elliott. They don't have to mirror the Elliott, but they should have sort of that foundation that parents and school leaders and teachers and kids need. So again, not just a simple reflection of the Elliott, but what a school community is striving for. And this $100 million that we're going to be working on through this budget process is really about creating those spaces, similar to that feeling of a great school in all of our cities, but a particular target on this small group of schools that just aren't performing at the level that our kids need them to. I think it's an embarrassing, in a city that has an embarrassment of riches, it's embarrassing when we have schools that I wouldn't feel comfortable sending my kids to. And I play a direct role, I have a direct hand in this work. It makes me uncomfortable. So all my contact information is on the newsletter. You all know Karen. Please be in touch, email, call. I want to say this newsletter that Karen handed out is a dense newsletter. It's the end of we do one every 6 months or so. It's dense, it's heavy reading. But please take some time to read it because we're proud of the work that we've been able to do as an office. The lovely picture of our team on the cover there for the holidays. But read it. If you've got questions, you've got comments, please send them our way. Call, email, reach out to Karen, reach out to me directly. It'd be great to hear from you.
Thank you.